My name's Mike, and I'm 63 now. For the past 38 years, I've been married to Linda, my wife, my partner, and the one who's been by my side through everything. We first met when I was 23, and she was 18. Together, we've gone through all of life's ups and downs, raised our kids, and built a life despite the challenges that come with marriage. Linda has always been my steady support, there for me when times were tough, and together, we built a life I once thought could never be shaken. I often find myself thinking back to the early years of our marriage. Back then, we didn't have much, but we had each other, and that was enough. By the time we hit our late 20s, we managed to buy our first house, raised 2 amazing kids, and shared countless moments, holidays, vacations, and all those memories that have shaped us. Linda was my rock. I always figured we'd grow old together, side by side, no matter what came our way. Lately, life has been pretty smooth. I took an early retirement, spending my time fixing up the house, diving into books, and enjoying the company of our grandkids. Linda, on the other hand, kept working. She's always loved her job, and recently, she was promoted to a leadership role. That brought on new responsibilities, and for the first time in years, she started traveling more for work. It was a shift that took some getting used to. I had grown accustomed to having her around, but now, she was heading off on business trips several times a year. I felt a mix of emotions about it. I was proud, she had worked hard for that promotion. But at the same time, I couldn't help but worry about how things might change between us. At our age, you start to really appreciate the time you have together, and those trips made it feel like something was slowly slipping away. I didn't want to dwell on it, though. We'd been married for so long, through so much, and I trusted her completely. Linda was always loyal, reliable, and loving. I had no reason to think otherwise. But as the trips became more frequent and she returned home looking more exhausted and distant, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. After one of her most recent trips, that feeling really settled in. She'd been gone for a few days, attending a conference in Boston. Usually, she'd come back, greet me with a kiss, and we'd sit down to catch up on her trip. But this time was different. When she walked through the door, she seemed completely drained, not just physically, but in a way that's hard to explain, like she was carrying a heavy weight inside. Her smile barely reached her eyes, and she didn't say much as she passed me and headed straight for the kitchen. "Tough trip?" I asked, trying to keep things light. "Yeah, just busy," she replied, already flipping through the mail like she didn't want to talk about it. I didn't press her. I figured the work must have been more intense this time with all her new responsibilities. But as the evening went on, I found myself watching her. Something wasn't right. She wasn't acting like herself. We sat down for dinner, but she barely touched her food, her eyes darting back to her phone like she was waiting for something. When I asked how the meetings went, she just shrugged it off, saying, they were fine, before changing the subject. It wasn't like her to be this quiet, this distant. Over the years, Linda and I had always been able to talk about anything. Even when we fought, we'd sort it out and move on. But now, it felt like there was this invisible wall between us, and I couldn't figure out why. The next few days were no better. She spent more time than usual up in her office, claiming to be catching up on work or emails. Anytime I walked in, she'd quickly put her phone away or close her laptop, almost like she didn't want me to see what she was doing. That was new for us, we had never kept anything from each other. We shared everything. Now, it felt like she was hiding something. I didn't want to believe there was anything wrong. I had known Linda nearly my whole life and trusted her completely. But the more I watched her, the harder it became to ignore the doubts creeping into my mind. It reminded me of when I was younger, the time I caught my dad cheating on my mom. I can still picture the look on her face when I told her. I never thought I'd have to face something like that again. But here I was, sitting in my own home, watching my wife act like a stranger. I couldn't help but wonder if I was about to experience that same heartache all over again. I wanted to ask her, to bring it up, but I couldn't find the words. Maybe I was afraid of what she'd say. Maybe I didn't want to hear the truth. But whatever it was, something between Linda and me had shifted, and I couldn't shake the feeling that everything we'd spent the last 38 years building was beginning to unravel. A few days passed, but nothing improved. Linda stayed distant, barely saying a word unless I directly asked her something. That wasn't like her. The sense that something was deeply wrong gnawed at me, driving me crazy. One evening after dinner, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided it was time to get it out in the open. We were sitting in the living room, the TV playing softly in the background. She was just staring at the screen, not really watching it, and I couldn't concentrate on anything myself. Finally, I turned to her and said, "Linda, seriously, what's going on? You've been acting strange ever since you came back from that trip." She didn't respond right away. She sat there, and I could see her body tensing up. After what felt like an eternity, she let out a sigh and looked down at her lap. "Mike," she said, her voice trembling, "there's something I need to tell you." I could feel my heart racing. "Okay," I replied, bracing myself for whatever was coming. I didn't know what she was going to say, but I had a sinking feeling it wasn't going to be good. "I made a mistake," she whispered. I slept with someone." Everything in me froze. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I just stared at her, trying to make sense of the words that had just left her mouth. "It was Eric," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper, unable to meet my eyes. "It happened on the last trip. Eric, her boss." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. How could this be happening? After all these years? "It was just once," she added quickly. "It didn't mean anything. I wasn't thinking straight. I don't even know why I let it happen." I still couldn't find the words. 38 years of marriage. We'd raised kids together, built a life together, and now this? She kept talking, telling me how sorry she was, how much she regretted it, how much she still loved me. But I barely heard any of it. My mind was spinning, and I couldn't process it. "I'm sorry," she said again, tears streaming down her face. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I couldn't keep lying to you." Finally, I stood up. "You need to leave," I said, my voice strangely calm even though inside I was falling apart. Her eyes widened. "Mike, please. I need space," I cut her off. "Go to your sister's for a while. I can't be around you right now." She started sobbing harder, but I didn't move. I couldn't. I was numb. She grabbed her phone, made the call, and a few minutes later, she was gone. And just like that, it was over. The house went quiet, and I found myself standing in the middle of the living room, not sure what had just happened. 38 years of marriage, and now it all felt like it was crumbling in front of me. I didn't even know what to do next. I sat back down on the couch, staring at the empty space where she had been sitting, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. After Linda left that night, the house felt like a tomb. I just sat there, lost in my thoughts. My mind was racing, yet completely blank at the same time. 38 years together. We'd built a life, raised kids, faced every challenge that life threw our way. And now it all felt like it was falling apart. I didn't even know where to start. How could she do this? I thought we had something real. I thought we were solid, that no matter what happened, we'd see it through together. But clearly, I'd been wrong. I sat there on that couch for what felt like hours, trying to make sense of it all. But no matter how hard I tried, I just couldn't. Every time I thought about it, about her and Eric, my chest tightened, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. I needed to get out of that house. Without really thinking, I grabbed my jacket, my keys, and just walked out. I didn't have a destination in mind. I just drove. It was late, the streets were mostly empty, and I wasn't even paying attention to where I was going. My brain was stuck on a loop, replaying everything she had said. It didn't mean anything. How could she even say that? Of course it meant something. You don't just throw away 38 years for nothing. Eventually, I found myself at the park a few miles from the house. It was dark, and no one else was around. I stayed in the car, staring out at nothing, anger bubbling inside me. But what could I do? I couldn't yell, couldn't cry, couldn't punch something. I was just stuck. I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing holding me together. I kept asking myself, when did this happen? Was there something I missed? Had Linda been unhappy, and I just didn't see it? I went over the last few months in my mind, trying to figure out when things started to go wrong, but nothing made sense. Maybe I didn't want to see it. Maybe I was too comfortable, thinking we were fine, thinking we were safe. It was well after midnight by the time I finally headed back home. Walking through the door, the silence hit me like a ton of bricks. It felt like stepping into a stranger's house. No Linda. No familiar sounds. Just an overwhelming emptiness. I sat down at the kitchen table, my head in my hands, feeling completely lost. I didn't know what to do. What do you even do after something like this? Can you forgive? Should you even try? I kept thinking about the life we'd built, how it was all hanging by a thread now. Could I trust her again? Or was it all over? I didn't have any answers, just a million questions bouncing around in my head. And I was beyond exhausted. Not just tired, but deeply worn out. But sleep wasn't coming, not after this. The life I thought I had figured out suddenly felt like it didn't belong to me anymore. I had no idea what was supposed to happen next, and that terrified me. The next morning, I woke up early, though I hadn't slept much. My body felt heavy, like I hadn't moved in days. Everything ached, my head, my chest, even my legs, like I'd been running a marathon in my sleep. I dragged myself up, made some coffee, but it did nothing to snap me out of the fog I was in. I kept thinking about what Linda had said, about Eric, about how it had only happened once. But had it? That question wouldn't leave my mind. Was she telling the whole truth, or just enough to stop me from asking more? I don't know what pushed me to do it, but around mid-morning, I grabbed my phone and opened Facebook. I hadn't been on there in ages, but I knew Eric's wife, Rachel, was on there. We'd met a few times over the years at work functions. If anyone could fill in the blanks, it would be her. My hands were shaking as I typed out a message. It was short, something like, "Hey, Rachel. Can we talk?" She replied faster than I expected. She said she already knew what this was about and asked if we could do a video call. I didn't hesitate. I needed answers. A few minutes later, we were on the call, and the look on her face told me everything I needed to know. She was going through hell, just like me. "I found out about the affair last week," she said, her voice heavy with exhaustion. I confronted Eric. He admitted it. I sat there, trying to absorb that. She knew. She'd known for a week. It wasn't just once, Mike, Rachel continued, her face hardening. They'd been talking for months. Texting. Calling. I found messages going back to January. January. It felt like the ground fell out from under me. Linda had told me it happened just once, that it didn't mean anything. But that was a lie. A big one. They got close at work, Rachel said, shaking her head. It wasn't all physical, at least not at first. It started with emotional stuff, and it just escalated. I felt sick. My chest tightened, and I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. This wasn't what Linda had told me. She'd made it sound like a one-time mistake, like something she regretted. But this? This was something else. This was planned. It had gone on for months, and I hadn't had a clue. I couldn't even find the words to respond, so Rachel kept talking. She told me how she'd noticed Eric pulling away, how he started staying late at work more often. She confronted him, but he kept brushing it off, making excuses. Until she found the texts. After that, there was no denying it. "I'm leaving him," Rachel said, her voice suddenly more steady. "I've already started packing his stuff." I just nodded, not sure what to say. Everything felt so heavy, like the air had been sucked out of the room. "What about you?" she asked. "What are you going to do?" That was the million-dollar question, wasn't it? What was I going to do? "I don't know," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "I honestly don't know." We talked a bit more after that, but my mind was spinning the whole time. I was trying to keep it together, but inside, I was falling apart. When we finally said our goodbyes, I just sat there for a while, staring at the screen after the call ended. Linda had lied. I'd given her the benefit of the doubt, and she'd lied to my face. I didn't know what hurt more, the fact that she cheated, or the fact that she couldn't even tell me the full truth. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do next. I knew I needed to talk to Linda again. I needed to know if she'd come clean or if there was even more she hadn't told me. But honestly, I wasn't sure I could handle hearing any more. After that conversation with Rachel, I felt like I was back to square one, or maybe even worse. Finding out that it wasn't just a one-time thing, but something that had been going on for months, hit me like a punch in the gut. I spent most of the day pacing around the house, trying to calm myself down, but nothing worked. I couldn't stop thinking about it, and the more I thought, the angrier I got. By the time evening rolled around, I knew I couldn't avoid it any longer. I had to talk to Linda again, and this time, I needed the truth. The whole truth. I picked up my phone and texted her, "We need to talk. Come by the house tonight." She responded quickly, saying she'd be there in an hour. I didn't know if I was ready for this, but I knew we couldn't keep dodging it. I wasn't going to let her brush things aside anymore. When she walked in, the tension was palpable. She looked like she'd been crying, her eyes were red and puffy, and she kept nervously fidgeting with her hands. But I wasn't in any mood to feel sorry for her. Not after everything I'd just found out. "We need to talk," I said, standing by the kitchen counter. I wasn't going to sit down for this. "I know," she whispered, taking a seat at the table. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "I talked to Rachel today," I said. "She told me it wasn't just once, Linda. You've been seeing him for months." Her face went pale, and she looked down at her hands again. She didn't even try to deny it. "I'm so sorry, Mike," she said quietly. "I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want to hurt you more than I already had." "More than you already had?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Linda, you didn't just cheat once. You lied to me. You've been lying for months. You let me sit here thinking it was a mistake, a one-time thing, when all along you were seeing him behind my back." "I know," she said, tears beginning to spill down her cheeks. "I know, and I'm so sorry." I shook my head, unable to even look at her. "Why, Linda? Why the hell would you do this? After everything we've been through, after all these years, why?" She wiped at her face, but the tears kept coming. "It wasn't planned, Mike. I swear to you, it wasn't. It started with just talking. It felt nice to have someone pay attention to me. And then, I don't know, things just got out of hand." "Out of hand?" I repeated, barely able to keep my voice steady. "Do you have any idea what you've done to me? To us?" "I was lonely, Mike," she said, her voice cracking. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I was just lonely." That word hit me like a slap in the face. We'd been married for 38 years. We'd built a life together, raised kids, weathered every storm side by side. And now, she was telling me she did this because she was lonely. I don't know what to say, I muttered, my voice shaking. I don't know if I can ever forgive this, Linda. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. She sobbed quietly, burying her face in her hands. I don't expect you to forgive me. I know I've ruined everything. But I love you, Mike. I love you, and I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. I'll quit my job. I'll go to therapy. I'll give you access to everything, my phone, my emails, whatever you need to trust me again. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her so badly. But the pain, the betrayal, it was too much. I didn't know if I could ever look at her the same way again. I need time, I said finally, my voice hoarse. I don't know what's going to happen. I just need time to think. She nodded, still crying, and slowly stood up. I'll go back to my sister's for now, she whispered. But please, Mike, just think about it. Please. I didn't say anything as she walked out the door. The moment it closed behind her, I let out a breath I hadn't even realized I'd been holding. I felt exhausted, like all the energy had drained out of me. This wasn't just about what she'd done, it was about the fact that she'd lied to me for so long, let me believe something that wasn't true. And now, I had to figure out if I could live with that. I wasn't sure if I could. The next few days were a blur. I stayed in the house, trying to stick to my routine, but nothing felt right. Everywhere I turned, I was reminded of Linda, of us. The silence was unbearable. The bed felt too big. Even sitting at the kitchen table felt strange without her there. I couldn't stop thinking about all the years we had spent together and how it had come to this. How do you even start to rebuild after something like this? Every time she crossed my mind, it was like a wave of pain hit me all over again. I kept hearing her say she was lonely. Lonely? After all these years, that's what drove her to do this. It didn't make sense to me. We had been through so much together, raised kids, lost parents, had our ups and downs like any couple. But this? This felt like something we might not be able to come back from. I had been thinking a lot, and the truth was, I didn't know what I wanted anymore. Part of me wanted to work things out, to at least try. 38 years is a long time to just throw away, and deep down, I still loved her. But the other part of me was furious, hurt beyond words. I wasn't sure if I could ever trust her again, not after all the lies. Linda had been texting me. Nothing major, just short messages like, I'm thinking about you or I hope we can talk soon. But I couldn't bring myself to reply. I needed space, and I wasn't ready to face her yet. Eventually, I decided to reach out to someone. Not family, not anyone who knew both of us, but an old friend of mine, Sam. We'd known each other for years, and he'd been through a rough divorce himself. I figured if anyone would understand, it'd be him. We met up for coffee, and it felt good just to get out of the house and be around someone who wasn't caught up in all of this. I told him everything, from Linda's confession to the conversation with Rachel. He listened quietly, letting me spill it all out. When I finally finished, Sam just shook his head. Man, that's tough, he said, taking a sip of his coffee. I won't tell you what to do, but I'll say this, whatever decision you make, it's gotta be for you. You've gotta think about what's going to let you move forward, whether that's together or on your own. I nodded, though I didn't feel any closer to figuring that out. You're allowed to be mad, hurt, all of it, Sam continued. But don't rush it. Take the time you need to figure it out. That really hit home. I had been feeling this pressure to make a decision, like I had to sort everything out right away. But maybe I didn't. Maybe I just needed to take a breath and let myself feel everything, as messy as it was. After our talk, I headed back home and sat down at the kitchen table. I looked around the room, thinking about all the years Linda and I had spent there. All the memories. It wasn't just the house that felt empty without her, it was my life. But at the same time, I wasn't sure if I could let her back in. Later that night, I finally texted her back. I told her we needed to meet and talk, really talk, about what comes next. I didn't know where the conversation would lead, but I knew I had to face it. She came by the next evening. The moment she walked in, I could tell she was nervous. She sat down across from me at the table, and for a minute, we just sat there in silence. "I've been thinking," I said, breaking the tension. "About us. About everything that's happened." She nodded, her eyes filled with regret. "I know I hurt you, Mike. And I don't expect things to go back to the way they were. I just want you to know how much I love you. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to fix this. But I also know that's up to you." I looked at her, and for the first time in days, I felt a little less angry. I wasn't sure if it was because I was starting to heal, or if I was just too tired to keep holding on to the anger. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I admitted. "At least not right now. But I also don't want to make any decisions I might regret later." She nodded, wiping away a tear. "I understand. I need more time," I said. "I need to see if we can rebuild that trust. But it's going to take a lot of work, and honestly, I don't know if it's possible." "I'll do anything," she said quietly. "Whatever you need." We sat there for a while, talking about what that would even look like. Therapy, transparency, everything out in the open. It wasn't going to be easy, and I wasn't making any promises. But I was willing to try. When she left that night, I didn't feel relief, but I didn't feel as lost either. I knew this was just the beginning of whatever came next. It wasn't a clean slate, but it was a step forward. Whether we'd make it or not, I still didn't know. But for the first time since it all came crashing down, I felt like maybe, just maybe, there was a path through it. Thank you for joining us for this touching journey of love, betrayal, and redemption. We hope it resonated with you, even brought a little inspiration. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming stories. We'd love to hear your thoughts and reactions in the comments. Feel free to share your own experiences or let us know what kinds of stories you'd like to see next. Thanks again for your support. Until then, take care and stay tuned for more great content.